Well, welcome, Purple. It's so nice to be with you. And I
Yeah,
just
great.
realized I'm wearing purple.
Well,
I
I
didn't
chose
plan that.
black today, which might not be the right choice considering how dark the rest of the room is. But
Yeah, no, it's all good. Yeah, just really looking forward to getting to know you, hearing your mindfulness story.
yeah, that's awesome. I'm excited to chat with you.
Yeah, so why don't we start with your story? When did you first encounter mindfulness, and when was that for you? What was going on in your life?
Ooh, yeah, that's like a lot of people, I think, who are on some kind of mindfulness journey. I kind of came to it through the door of suffering. Um, let's see, I am almost 49. I discovered Buddhism when I was about 22 or 23. I'd been waiting tables for a couple years after dropping out of college and just sort of at loose ends, partying like a rock star, uh, just sort of going nowhere and going really, really fast. Uh, and yeah, I was kind of at the end of my rope. Um, I was pretty burned out on life and everything in general, and was in a pretty disturbingly dark and evil place. And yeah, I just stumbled across a little book on Buddhism. I still don't really know why I picked it up. I've never been interested in Buddhism or any religion at all, really. But I read it cover to cover. It was very short, and something in it just connected somewhere in a way that nothing else ever had. It was like there was a loose end flapping around inside of me that had finally found something to plug into, but I didn't even know it was there. It was very bizarre. Um, and I always hear stories like, "Oh, such and such saved my life with such suspicion," like unless it was like Batman. And you're like, "Yeah, okay, right, I can dig that." But yeah, I feel like this pretty much saved my life. So I started to explore and came across the three sort of main branches of Buddhism. And the only thing that was really in my town was Shambhala. We had a Shambhala center. So I started going there and was a member there for 5 or 6 years. Um, and eventually drifted away from that and kind of participated in some Korean Zen, some Japanese Zen for a while, and then some Theravada. And eventually discovered secular Buddhism, which kind of was the second big resonance for me on this journey. It really spoke to my kind of practical, level headed, sort of materialistic approach to all of this. Um, and then I discovered Shinzen Young and his teachings, which sort of brought it all together. Uh, and I realized early on I wanted to be some kind of a teacher. This had helped me so much and had been such an important turning point in my life. I wanted to be able to share it with other people. Um, I don't think I'll ever be any kind of Buddhist teacher, but as the mindfulness movement sort of gained speed and the science behind it started to get more solid and really emerge, that became obvious as the path for me to choose. So yeah, I went through all of Unified Mindfulness's teacher training over the past 5 years. I've been working with clients privately and publicly for probably 7, 8, 9 years. Um, yeah, and this continues to be sort of the crux of my whole life, both teaching and practicing. They have mutually reinforced each other in ways that I never could have expected. So that double-edged sword has kind of become the center of pretty much everything that I do. So
So beautiful. Thank you for sharing. A
yeah.
couple of things that really uh, came to mind for me as you were talking is this image of this plug, right? Like, I love that. I'd never heard that before. It's almost like something's off, right? Something's off. And then it was like, oh, this makes sense. So I'm curious if you could say more about that, because I'm thinking of listeners who might be feeling that way now, right? Like, I'm doing the things in life, or maybe I'm not doing the things in life, whatever, however life is going, but something feels like it's off. So what was that connected you? Do you remember? Or
Yeah, it was. And I think that's one of the hardest things about the way I was suffering, and I'm sure the way a lot of other people are suffering, is I don't want to make it sound very cliche, like there was a hole or an emptiness or something that blasé, but I it wasn't specifically that I felt that something was missing and all of a sudden I found it. Something was very off in my life. I was miserable.
hmm,
Most of it was self-imposed, drugs and alcohol and partying like crazy and, just living like a 21-year-old server, that
hmm,
was kind of the norm. Um, but yeah, it all felt like it was leading nowhere, but none of it was very well defined. It was this just sort of amorphous nothingness that was going on, this vacuity or pointlessness. And when I read the book and read the teachings on suffering, like,
hmm.
Buddha's ideas on why we suffer, because we're always dissatisfied with the
Yes.
way things are. And realizing that it was my fault, that I was responsible for my suffering, was probably the biggest eye opener, because I was a champion of blaming everything else.
Hmm.
Like, oh, I dropped out of college. Well, I was forced to go to college. I wasn't ready, but that was the only choice I had. And oh, I ended up waiting tables because I wasn't fit to do anything else. I didn't choose this life. And, it turns out you pretty much do. All of this was at some level my own intentions.
Hmm.
And I think that was a big part of it. But I think it was the path out of suffering, this idea that there was a path that relied on my own newer intentions and actions and motivations and practice. I guess maybe what the biggest connection was learning that I was responsible mostly for my own suffering, but also being given the responsibility to change it.
Yes.
So seeing
Yeah.
those things articulated without ever having known that was the issue was sort of where the plug-in came. The problem and the solution both became clear at the same time.
Right. That's amazing. Yeah, because it's almost like you have a way to climb out of the hole, right? Like we can do it. We just
Right.
it's up to us. That's really exciting.
Yeah.
And do you remember what your first practices were? Did you do meditation on the breath or something else? And did you have a teacher at that time?
It was pretty much just meditation on the breath. For the first over a year, all I did was study. I'm a pretty nerdy, logical guy. I like to discover as much about a new topic as I can. So I just read dozens of books and slowly started to parse out the different approaches. So it was over a year before I actually started meditating. But yeah, it was just following the breath, just basic shamatha practice. I was actually living in Tallahassee, Florida at the time. And when I moved back from there to Lexington, Kentucky, where I have been living since then, is when I found the Shambhala Center. So that became more of a shamatha vipassana type of approach. But I never got into the more Vajrayana teachings of Shambhala. I always pretty much stayed on the, kind of the suitable for the general public approach. And then
Sure.
after I drifted
Mhm.
away from them, I've been through many different kinds, and I've kind of come full circle back, and I'm now working with a Dzogchen teacher. So it's been an
Okay.
odd journey.
Do you want to tell us a bit about those terms, maybe for the audience, like what
Sure.
shamatha is and vipassana and what you're
Yeah.
practicing now?
So I
Mhm.
kind of use the Pali terms there. Pali being the uh, kind of language of the Brahmins, the official written language of the Buddha's time, although what he spoke was, or that was Sanskrit, sorry, not Pali. Uh, Shamatha being essentially concentration practice, focusing on something like your breath or a candle flame or a reasonably constant noise. And whenever your attention moves away from it or slides away from it, kind of gently bringing it back. And then Vipassana being the more insight-related practice that kind of historically you build a certain level of concentration with shamatha and then use that concentration to kind of examine your thoughts and emotions and feelings and point it inward. And it was kind of the way they taught it at Shambhala was kind of a 1-2 punch. They were kind of combined together as sort of not you do one until you get to a certain point and then you switch to this, but it was kind of the whole ball of wax all at once. And then Dzogchen is usually translated as the Great Seal or the Great Perfection. It's a Tibetan style of practice that sort of skips all of the shamatha vipassana stuff and goes directly to understanding your own basic enlightened reality. It's sort of a teleportation device that is extremely difficult to describe and without a doubt the most simple practice out there, which of course makes it the most difficult to both explain and practice somehow. So
yeah, that's so interesting. And it really ties into our whole theme around the tailored mindfulness experience, right? That there isn't one thing that everybody has to do and that's going to work for everybody. It's like how did you know when to do one, when to do the other, when to switch? Is there something that tells you need something different or
yeah,
something going on in your life?
that really didn't become a skill that I had until I started working with Shenzhen.
Okay.
Having so many different methods within Unified Mindfulness, it was always kind of like being spoiled for choice, like you're standing in the aisle trying to pick out toothpaste and there's 100 of them instead of 4. So it was a little overwhelming at first, but as I practiced with a lot of different methods, it started to become clear when one would be more appropriate than another. So it sort of became my own internal guidance system. And I became very comfortable with switching if my first idea didn't work. Shinzen has this idea of ion, interest, opportunity, and necessity. So starting with a specific meditation technique, and then if you find something in your experience very interesting, or there's an opportunity to work with something or explore something, or there's a necessity, like something is re-traumatizing you, or something is moving you outside your window of tolerance. Those are sort of the 3 categories that he likes to use for reasons to adjust the technique or move to another one. So I kind of absorbed that, and now it's become, like I said, sort of an internal guidance system to where it's become very intuitive, so that if I'm working with something specific and the technique I'm using doesn't seem to be beneficial, then I'll dial it to something else without the 100% hardcore expectation that that's going to solve it. I'm willing to try different things and it gets more artistic than scientific. Like you just sort of start weaving your way through the experience with different ideas and approaches, being kind of open and curious to it as a whole. And I think that openness and curiosity is more vital than probably anything else.
Yeah, that's so great and interesting how over time you develop this kind of intuitive sense of what's needed. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, does that also reflect in your life? What were the changes that you started to see in your life? Did you have more of a sense of where to go? You mentioned you moved, so how did the practice affect your decisions in your life?
At that point, not a lot. That was I was probably 25 when I moved back from Florida. So I'd only been practicing sort of in a not very committed way for about a year and studying for a couple of years. It wasn't until I practiced with Shambhala for 5 or 6 years, and I lived at their retreat center in Vermont. Um, but it wasn't until I sort of discovered secular approaches that I really settled into a practice. And it wasn't until I discovered Shinzen that things really solidified. And I'd always been told by various participants that I needed to pick a lineage or pick an approach and stick with it. Because, I did Tibetan, and then I did Japanese Zen, and I did Korean Zen, and I did Theravada Buddhism, and I did secular Buddhism. And everybody was like, you're not going to find the perfect thing. You're just going to have to pick something and settle, warts and all. And then I found Shinzen, and I was like, well, that's not true. Here it is. I've been waiting for it for 20 years, and I found it. So that gave me the versatility in my practice to finally feel like I had that same sort of versatility in my life. So that sort of intuitive decision making on the cushion has sort of translated into the rest of life, where I've never been a hardcore planner, but I'm not totally spontaneous either, kind of in the middle. And that's become a lot easier to pick a decision and go with it and not have to expect it to be perfect.
Yes.
Because it's the same, it's kind of a mirror image of practice. I may sit down for a 40-minute sit thinking, oh, I'm going to do this one particular technique with a pretty concrete idea of what I want out of it. And 20 minutes later, it's completely changed. It's not exactly rolling with the punches so much as it is being open to that possibility at all times. So I don't know, life just got a lot more fulfilling because I feel like I kind of stopped in both my practice and my life, stopped expecting everything to be a certain way.
Yeah.
And once that freedom kind of opens up, it becomes a little less limiting for everything.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It reminds me of, I just heard actually Shinzen talk recently about effort, right? So there's a lot of us that like kind of effort through life. And so then when we find, oh, we can let go of effort and just relax, and we think that's the answer, right? Like, oh, I'm just going to relax and I'm just going to tell everybody to relax. But then there's other people or other times when you might be like just too soft and, and you need a little structure. And so it's like knowing that there's not one way, I guess. It's just that intuitive knowing, but it can be really destabilizing at times. At least I've found, I don't know if you found that, like, I'll have for me, I have a sense, okay, well, this is where I'm going in my life. And then maybe I'll go on retreat or I'll go on a trip or something. And I'm like, that wasn't the right, or I don't really feel excited about that anymore. Like, what else should I do? And it's confusing. No, how do you find there's periods of just confusion, and do you just stay with the confusion? How do you work through that?
Well, can you unpack that? Like, when are you relating that idea of confusion to both practice and life? Like, sometimes on the cushion there's that confusion, and then sometimes in life there's like, even though I'm more open to possibilities, things seem sort of muddled. Is that kind of what you're pointing toward?
Yeah, I think more in life. I find sometimes, for me, I'm lucky, I guess, practice. I find I can be at home in practice and in different techniques. Doesn't really matter so much. But then it's like, oh no, what do I do in my life?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I work with clients on, and it took me forever, is eroding that sort of wall between life and practice.
Yeah.
And Shinzen system is really great for that because, it has life practice, it has formal practice, it has informal practice, it has many different ways to bring the practice home at all times. but yeah, that's a really interesting perspective because it sounds kind of like what you're saying is like on the cushion, I'm really at home in what I'm doing. Like whatever life on the cushion throws at me, practice allows me to work with. But then as soon as you step off the cushion, there's that possibility that, well, I'm no longer like deep in meditation. Now I have to pay bills and figure out what's wrong with the car and take the kid to the doctor. And yeah, that's
And
the
for me
biggest,
also helping, how do you help all the problems in the world, right?
right?
What do you choose?
Yeah. For me, that answer has always been clear. Is helping myself, getting myself
Mm,
in the. I sounded really selfish when I said it out loud. Finding a way for me to be at ease with myself before I could start being able to help others, and that was the
mm.
longest part of this journey. And still, I struggle in helping clients sometimes. Especially if they're struggling with issues that used to be very big for me or are currently, something that I'm working on. But again, that 1-2 punch of practice and teaching really mutually reinforce each other and makes it both a lot more fulfilling. But yeah, I think the eroding that wall between practice and life has been the biggest thing.
Yes.
Realizing that I can bring a technique to bear anytime off the cushion, and then also starting to understand and notice the benefits of a cultivated meditation practice in life. Realizing that when someone does something stupid in traffic, I still yell and scream, but I only do it for like 10 seconds and it doesn't ruin my day.
Yes.
Rather than holding on to that for the next 6 hours and still being mad on my way home. Um, Noticing that my patience seems to be expanding even when I'm not working on it. Noticing that my leniency with myself, my kindness towards myself, seems to be more relaxed and open than it used to be. And I think that's one of my favorite things about both Shinzen and Dzogchen practice is this idea that there's no separator. You
Yes.
mentioned effort and this idea of efforting, and there is Shinzen's practice of do nothing, and Shikantaza in Zen, and Mahamudra and Dzogchen. There are so many practices out there that are effortless,
Mm,
where it's simply a mode of relaxing any technique or involvement or intention and simply being with your natural awareness as it is. That's been huge for me because for the longest time I was plodding ahead one step at a time, gritting my teeth, trying to be mindful at all times.
yes.
Trying to use a technique no matter what, trying to examine my experience no matter what. And that was very grueling and it got exhausting to the point where I just had to stop. And
Yes.
in stopping and relaxing that effort, everything seemed to kind of open up. And I realized that that potential is there on the cushion and off the cushion to sometimes drop that effort and just be like. I remember the first time I learned see, hear, feel, and I had been practicing noting meditation for a while. And, Shinzen and Juliana and all these wonderful teachers were saying, you can do see, hear, feel on the cushion. You can do it in the car. You can do it standing in line at the grocery or the bank or while you're waiting for the doctor. And I remember asking the question, well, when can we stop all this shit and just be?
Yeah.
Just like be people not working on a technique. And there was just such confusion. They were like, well, like at some point you just do. Like they didn't know how to
Yeah.
explain it. And now I understand because it's something you can't really explain that easily. But that for me was the biggest step towards opening up practice to my entire life and relating to life and its insanity and confusions in a way that was a little more open ended. So I definitely strive for specific results in my life. I want certain things out of the work that I do and the practices that I do. and the relationships that I have. So I certainly aim them in a certain direction. But if they don't hit the target in the way that I thought they do or I thought they should, then I'm usually much more curious about exploring where they actually did land, as opposed to getting furious or hurt that it didn't turn out the way I thought it would.
Yes. I love the curiosity, right? Like
Mm,
that seems to be a big part of it, just to
very
that you
much.
can still, and a way to balance it, you can still have goals and ideas about what you want, but at times to just kind of, I wonder how it's going to turn out.
Right. Or,
Yeah.
it's all, there's so many expectations,
Mm.
and I think there's a common misconception that things like equanimity, or peace or calm or acceptance mean accepting situations as they are, accepting a negative situation. One of the biggest criticisms that the traditionalists level at secular mindfulness is, well, let's look at the corporate world where, a lot of times you offer corporate mindfulness seminars, and the criticism has always been, you're not attempting to help people see their true selves or be free. You're just trying to create docile workers that their corporate overlords can get more work and hours out of. And I've been doing this for a long time, and I've been working with other people who have been doing this for a long time. And that is categorically false
Mm-hmm.
across every width and breadth, every optic of this. That is absolutely false. And being able to see someone catch a little glimmer of relief or insight, and knowing that that is something that they can fan on their own, or they can get guidance or help from another coach, I feel like that has opened up an entire new world that the traditionalists don't have much of a grasp on. Like, I feel that there is a brand new wing of this whole thing that we're kind of exploring that has enormous potential, because we're never encouraging people to accept a negative circumstance. If you are working in a mom and pop shop or a corporate environment or working for yourself, and the circumstances are overtly negative and you're suffering because of them, I think we help teach people to accept their emotional reaction to that,
Mm.
but
Yes.
to still strive diligently to change those circumstances. I feel like we're helping people plug in more easily to their own intuition and see things a little more clearly, so that they don't have to accept things like that, but the emotional response to them doesn't send them on such a roller coaster, if that makes sense. I don't,
Totally makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah. So it's almost like you get the clarity. You might be really mad about something, and it's not like, oh, let's just not be mad about it and just like show
Right.
up every day and be smiling. It's like, well, what's going on with the mad, and what's
Mm-hmm.
actually happening, and what are some possibilities? Do you have maybe an example from your own life or a student where they were able to, the practice helped them make a change or work
Yeah,
with a
it's
situation?
specifically from my life is, I worked in the service industry for 25 years. Uh, and while I was studying to be a teacher and while I was learning those ropes, I continued to be a bartender, and I was miserable. I hated it.
Mm.
I didn't want to be in the service industry anymore. And the job that I was in was not taking advantage of me, but it was a delicate situation that finally got to a point where I couldn't figure out exactly what was expected, and felt like I was in an uncompromising position. So I quit. And
Mm-hmm.
it was one of the best decisions I've ever made. I was continuing to practice, I was continuing to study and work with clients and learn to be a better teacher. And I think me from 15 years ago would have said, well, your perceptions about this situation are probably skewed. your reaction to this is probably inaccurate. You need to up your practice. You need to work with this suffering. You need to stay in this situation and work with this suffering. Whereas me from 5 years ago said, there's no reason to put up with this bullshit. You're
Yes.
absolutely unhappy, and your experience keeps telling you over and over and over again that you're unhappy. So I quit, and it was great. Um, it was exactly what I
Beautiful.
needed, and I think without so many years of practice, I wouldn't have been able to trust that clarity,
Yeah.
that I was seeing things clearly enough to make an informed decision about where to go in a more healthy direction. So yeah, and it got to the point where my practice wasn't strong enough that I could accept the emotional response to it. Like the situation was so negative that I was being very much pushed and pulled by my emotional response to it. So there was no level of it that I was working with in a way that could smooth things out. So
Hmm.
quitting that job was the only logical, intuitive, spiritual, psychological response that made sense.
Beautiful. And were you scared to
Oh
quit?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
terrible.
And you just kind of work with the fear as
Yeah,
well, right?
because
Yeah.
then that meant I was going to rely primarily on working with mindfulness clients to make a living, and yeah, that was absolutely scary. And quitting something that you've been doing for 25 years is, there's a lot of ruts that were grooved into my brain and my body and my life from doing that particular job or being in that particular industry. So yeah, it was very scary, but it was much more freeing than it was scary after the initial jump.
Yeah. Wonderful. And what is your life like now? At both in terms of practice, we talk about the various pillars of practice, formal, informal, retreat versus just at home, and also, well, the give support, get support.
Right.
We tell us a little bit about what that's like for you now, and also
Yeah.
maybe some benefits that you're experiencing.
Right. Yeah. So life practice has definitely been, the biggest of Shinzen's four pillars for me. And when we talk about those specifically, I think Shinzen says life practice, retreat practice, and then getting support and giving support, like you
Yes.
just mentioned. Life practice is the strongest one for me. I have trouble finding the time for extended retreats. I try to do several per year, several weekend retreats solo, just by myself. But yeah, it's mainly life practice, sitting formally a couple of times a day. Um, and there's been a lot of sort of Vajrayana Buddhist techniques that have worked their way into my informal practices. So a lot of Shinzen type micro hits coupled with a lot of other, uh, more Dzogchen oriented kind of micro hits. I've become comfortable being a hybrid practitioner and coach. Sort of
Hmm.
my background is extensive. Uh, why it covers a whole lot of ground, and I've become
Right.
comfortable over the years in incorporating all of that into my practice and the way I help or the way I coach people. Uh, so yeah, retreat practice is something I definitely need to work on. I need to get on more and longer retreats. But I love, I think getting support and giving support designed as two pillars are amazing. A great innovation or, idea on Shinzen's part, because I give a lot of support through coaching, and that's certainly something that makes me a better person and a better practitioner. But I also get support from so many people in the UM community that have been doing this so much longer than me, and it's such a casual community where I can just email or text somebody and ask a question or ask them to clear something up. I feel like there's constant support coming from there. I have a Dzogchen teacher that I work with as often as I can, so I'm constantly getting support from like a very deep coaching and teaching aspect. But I feel like those two things kind of twined together are kind of the fuel that keeps all of this going for me.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our audience about how you teach if people wanted to get in touch with you? What are you offering? And also any, I guess, parting words of wisdom for people that are just starting out and starting to figure out how to do this mindfulness thing?
Man, I am terrible at parting words of wisdom. And that's uh yeah, so I work one-on-one with clients. I work with groups as well, but I think the thrust of my solo business is working one-on-one with clients. So I have a website, brentpurpleoliver.com, and the email is brent@brentpurpleoliver.com. Uh, I like to offer free consultations to people just to have a casual chat and see if we'd be a good fit to work together, find out what they're looking for. Do they want to work with a specific issue, or do they have a specific goal in mind, or is it kind of overall mental health? And then I tend to work with people in 50-minute sessions, once a week or once every couple weeks, just sort of helping them shape their practice in the direction they would like to go, making sure we can address a long-term vision while at the same time still working on all of the short-term stuff that pops up, the little windows and walls that constantly pop up in the middle of our practice. But yeah, this is what has become most fulfilling for me, is connecting with people who resonate with the way that I work and the way that I teach, which is admittedly rough around the edges and non-traditional. It's filled with a lot of references to horror movies and a fair amount of cursing. I'm not for everyone. And it took the first several years of my teaching career for me to stop trying to appeal to everyone and to be able to relax into who and what I am. My teachers have taught me that one of the most important things in working with people is that you like them and they like you. This isn't really a cold, hard business transaction. This is personal. It's intimate. And if you don't enjoy working with the person that you're working with in this sort of mindfulness approach, then you're probably not going to get very much out of it. So I guess those are my parting words of wisdom. If you're looking for a teacher, or you're looking for a coach, or you're interested in getting into mindfulness, look around and see if you can find a person whose persona or approach, something about them speaks to you in a specific way, and you feel comfortable and at home and like they kind of vibe with you on a level that means something.
Yeah, that's great advice. And it reminds me of something else that somebody told me, which is you don't need to suffer alone, right? Like that should just, that they're at all levels. Like you have a teacher, I just got back from retreat and was very confused. So reached out to a teacher, so that at all levels we have each other, and it's good to connect with people that we enjoy spending time with
Yeah,
to learn together.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And a lot of the people I work with don't have a community like we do. I have several different communities that of teaching and of practitioners that I can rely on. But a lot of the people I work with, their spouse isn't into it, or, their partner isn't into it, or their friends aren't meditating or getting into mindfulness. So a lot of times they feel some trepidation because they're starting this out all alone. So you become a community of two with them, and making them feel like you see them and you hear them and you understand the type of suffering that they're going through, and normalizing all of that for them, I think is a really, really big step in this. Because I think we take for granted a lot of times how deep our communities go. As long-term practitioners and coaches and teachers, we've been establishing this for years. But so many people don't know how to get started and feel like they're doing this just in a vacuum all by themselves. And it's very intimidating.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
Well, thank you so much, Purple.
yeah.
I really appreciate your wisdom and your story and your joining us, even though you're not feeling well. And yeah, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with you and collaborate and learn from you. So
Yeah,
thanks
me
again.
too. Ditto. This was great.